Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider newsletter, and your host. And we're really glad you're here with us today. If you are brand new to the social and you just sort of found us on Facebook or somewhere else, welcome. If you want to be on our list so that you know everything we do, you could go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet, get on our list, and you will get a free ebook. We've been in business for 31 years, and we have compiled our best beginner tips for getting started writing for kids in one ebook, and that's yours for free for getting on our list. And if you are interested in subscribing to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is the product that is 31 years old now, you can go to writeforkids.org/CBI and subscribe for $5 a month. It's a special offer for our socialites. And it's an e-newsletter. It will come to your inbox every month. It's about 20 pages, lots of great info on writing for kids, the business side of publishing, interviews with authors, editors, agents, market information for your submission opportunities, and there's a special above the slush code every month with an editor or agent that allows you to jump over the slush pile with your submission. So that's really awesome. And we have a companion website, the CBI Clubhouse, that you also have access to and get lots of information, back issues, recordings of old webinars we've done in the past, all sorts of great information there. $5 a month. Just skip one of your Starbucks coffees once a month and you pay for it right there. So now we get to celebrate. Yay! I love this part. I have some great ones this week, by the way, some really awesome celebrates. Bonnie Lindauer's debut nonfiction picture book biography, Hannah G. Solomon Dared to Make a Difference, illustrated by Sophia Moore, will be released on September 1st from Carbon Publishing. And you can go to her website, BonnieLindauer.com, for more info. And she was also invited to participate in the Jewish Book Council's 2021 networking conference, where she got to present a pitch about her book to 250 representatives of Jewish schools and other organizations, which is an awesome opportunity because these are people who would be buying the book for their schools. So Bonnie, congratulations on that. That's great. Our friend Jennifer Swanson, who's been a guest on the Kidlit Distancing Social, she's an amazing author, but also she has this great podcast called Solve It for Kids, and it was named number 9 of the top 15 science podcasts for kids on the web by FeedSpot. FeedSpot is a sort of podcast clearinghouse place, and they named hers as one of the top 15 science podcasts for kids. So that's awesome. And you can check out her podcast at solveitforkids.com. It's amazing. So congrats, Jennifer, on that. And Ann Newberger's self-published young adult book, 2 Days in One Suitcase, The True Story of One Family's Choice of Friendship and Goodwill During World War II, has won a whole bunch of awards from the Catholic Media Association. As you can see, first place for Catholic novels in the education category, first place in books for youth ages 11 to 16, first place in self-published books, and an honorable mention in the memoir category. So Anne, awesome. Congrats. That is amazing. Keep up the good work, everybody. And I want to hear your good news. So email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and I will feature you on a future Kidlit Distancing Social. And as I like to say, no celebration is too small. Doesn't have to be a book publication. Anything you want to celebrate, any milestone in your writing career at all, we will help you celebrate. I have 2 cool links of interest this week. One is the perks of reading across genre as both a bookseller and writer. This is on the Literary Hub blog, and it discusses how to become a better writer by reading outside of your genre. And I think that's a really, really important point. We're all told to study books as mentor texts that are similar to ours. But you also want to read books that are completely different from yours because it's going to expand your imagination. It's going to help you see writing from different angles. It might even give you ideas on how to fix a problem in your book if you're reading something completely different. So, direct link to that article is bit.ly/across genres. And this next one is near and dear to my heart. Dashes versus hyphens, explanation and examples, on the Pro Writing Aid blog. And this explains the difference between M dashes, N dashes, and hyphens. And this is a real pet peeve of mine. And also, I just get so excited when I see these kind of posts. That is the editor in me just being very, very happy right now. So the direct link is bit.ly/dashes and hyphens. And especially if you're self-publishing, you want to know this. You know, obviously you should hire a copy editor to double check everything for you, but you need to know this as well. Okay. Now is time for us to welcome our awesome guest. Shakirah Bourne is a Bajan author and filmmaker, and she grew up in Barbados, where she currently still lives. She once shot a movie scene in a cave with bats during an earthquake, but is too scared to watch horror movies, and I can totally relate to that, 100%. She enjoys exploring old graveyards, daydreaming, and eating mangoes, and spends most of her time staring at the sea, thinking of new stories to tell. How wonderful is that? Her debut middle grade contemporary fantasy, Josephine Against the Sea, will be published by Scholastic on July 6th. Not very far away, so we're really lucky to help her celebrate that. Her young adult anthology, Allies, real talk about showing up, screwing up, and trying again, which she co-edited with Dana Allison Levy, will be published in the US by DK Books in September. Now, she's won about a gazillion awards for her books for adults and children, and her short stories and her films. And she's got 2 more middle grade novels coming up over the next 2 years. So, Shakirah, please come join me and welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction.
Sure. I love it. I love that you were in a cave with bats, but you're too afraid to watch horror movies.
I know, right? I'm such a wimp. Oh my gosh, it's embarrassing.
No, I can totally relate. I wouldn't, I have trouble with horror movies too, though I'm not sure if I could have stayed very long in the cave with the bats either. So you're doing better than me in that
To be fair, I did not know the bats were in the cave at the time. So it just happened. So it sounds a lot braver in the bio, but it wasn't planned.
Great. So, so I'm really excited to have you on here tonight. I just think that your book is so interesting, and your whole experience is so interesting. So you write, you know, everything: adult fiction, short stories, plays, films. You've written things for children. Is there one type of writing that kind of comes most easily to you, or do they all have different challenges for you?
Oh my gosh. Do you want the short answer, the long answer? Honestly, all right. Okay. So I used to say that short fiction is my husband and screenwriting is my outside lover. So that's how I started off in short fiction. And I think that's mainly because of what I read. In the Caribbean, we have a tradition of adult literary fiction. It is the work that is most awarded and revered in the region. So naturally, I started writing that. However, I always felt as if a book was just too many words. Like even my short stories were short. So my short stories never used to go over 2,000 words at all. And people would say, and when I say people, I would say the local writing community, that my short stories often seem too commercial to be literary fiction.
Hmm.
But then it it was too literary for commercial fiction. So I always felt like I didn't quite belong. And I mean, I always tried to write what came to me, but it never seemed to have a home, really. I mean, sometimes I would be published in some journals, but I always seemed to be on the outside of the category.
Right.
And then I happened to oversleep for a creative writing class. And I went to the class at 1 o'clock thinking that it was creative writing, but it was script writing.
Oh.
And that just opened a whole new world of writing for me, because for once this genre kind of fit my natural writing style. I am not an overly descriptive writer in terms of setting. You know, I cannot go on for 2 pages about trees. Like, that's not my type of writing. But with screenwriting, you don't have time to do that. It is high paced. It is completely visual. The sentences needs to be short and snappy. So I found that it actually blended well to my natural writing style. So for a couple of years, I just wrote movies. And the thing about writing movies is a feature film is like 1 hour, 40 minutes, 2 hours, which is the equivalent of 120 pages. So I had to learn the craft of screenwriting. And in doing that, I had to learn how to extend the story. So without realizing, before I was only able to write short, like snapshots of life. But when I moved on to screenwriting, I had to learn how to build an entire story in terms of feature length. So after I started to miss writing, because let's be real, script writing is great, but I still miss the ability to explore a character's mind, because, you know, with film, you can only really write what people can see. You know, people don't really read the scripts, so you don't really get that descriptive of emotions, etc. So I really miss fiction. And so when I went back, I found that suddenly I had so much more to say. I had so much more to say. And that's when I dabbled with playwriting, which honestly is my least favorite out of all of them. I mean, it was really good in terms of practicing refining dialogue skills, you know, because it is a lot of the narrative is driven through dialogue, but it was not my favorite in terms of structure at all. And then when I finally came back to books, I stumbled upon Kidlit. I kid you not. I had a project and it fell through. So I had 3 weeks with nothing to do. And there was this competition called the Burt Award for Caribbean Literature. And it's basically you submit a story, 20,000 words minimum. And the deadline was in 3 weeks. Oh. So I was like, this is not possible. But then I read some blogs from previous winners. And one of them was like, oh my God, I wrote this entire thing in 14 days. And I was like, I have a week more. Like, if she can do it in 14 days, then, you know, I have 21. Like, why can't I do it? And man, for 21 days, I did nothing but write what became Josephine Against the Sea, the first draft. And it was so great to write. I forgot how pleasure writing can be, you know. As a freelance writer, you're so accustomed to writing for deadlines and writing for other people, you kind of forget to write for the fun of it. And writing Kidlit and writing fantasy in particular, this was my first time I would have experimented with that genre. I felt like I rediscovered my passion for writing. So I'm really glad that it worked out. I was a finalist in the competition, and
that's great.
And that allowed me to have a Caribbean publishing deal, which is for My Fishy Stepmom, which is an earlier version of Josephine Against the Sea.
Right.
And I got my agent from My Fishy Stepmom. And now suddenly I'm a Kidlit writer. So, but you know, who knows what's next? Because that's why, like, I really like to experiment with all forms of writing. Yeah. So I don't even know if I answered your question in terms of which one is my favorite.
No, I think it's great. And I think, you know, it was interesting you were talking about when you learned film writing, and it's action oriented. There's not a lot of description, and that's not
Mhm.
what you do anyway. I could really tell that that transferred very well to Kidlit for you.
Yes.
Um, Josephine Against the Sea, it's you know, the story, you just jump right in. It takes off. By the end of the first chapter, I knew so much about her as a character and her relationship with her father and her backstory, but it was all through action,
Yes.
and it was great. And I could tell that your film writing really helped influence that. It was like a movie unfolding in front of you in a lot of ways, but
Fingers
with thought.
crossed. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed that someone else will think that and
Yeah.
film it.
Absolutely. Well, another thing that I wanted
Mhm.
to ask you about, as a filmmaker and a playwright, do you write in three act structure? Because that's something that filmmakers use, and I wondered if that influenced how you plot out your books.
Okay. That's a really good question because remember I said I have 3 weeks to write
Hmm.
Josephine Against the Sea. And for people who don't know, Josephine Against the Sea is a middle grade fantasy book, contemporary fantasy. And it's about 11-year-old Josephine who finds out that her dad's new girlfriend is a sea creature. Josephine is very mischievous, and because of the death of her mom, she's really overprotective of her dad. And so she creates booby traps to scare all his previous girlfriends away. But these tricks do not work on Maurice, who is the dad's new girlfriend. And obviously, people don't believe her because of her previous antics. So she does have to convince the entire family and community of Maurice's true identity before she loses her dad forever. And it's coming out with Scholastic in 2 weeks. Oh my God, 2 weeks. So because normally when I'm writing short stories, I am a complete pantser. I could write an entire story about a man sitting down on a bench and thinking about something that happened to him in his early childhood.
Hmm.
But and I would start the story and I won't quite know where I'm going with it. But that was the beauty of writing short fiction at the time. With Josephine Against the Sea, I only had 3 weeks. So I did not have time to pants. So what I did is that I plotted out the book like I would a movie,
Hmm.
right? And that is using the triads structure. Sid Field is a favorite of that. And so I broke down the story. And this is before I knew, by the way, this is before I knew that this is generally how the type of structure people use for books anyway.
Hmm.
I broke it down so that I made it manageable. So instead of, okay, this is a book and it's supposed to be 60,000 words, it became 15,000 words per act if you break act two in two parts, right?
Hmm.
That 15,000 words became 10 chapters of 1,500 words. And when I was able to break it down like that, it made the story manageable,
Hmm.
right? And so with Josephine, I already had it in my head. I plotted out all of the major plot points. I knew how the story began. I knew at the end of Act One, which is 25% of the book, her life will change and she cannot go back to the life that she knew before. So I knew at 25% in, I knew I wanted Maurice to enter her life. I knew the midpoint of the climax is when she would have her first encounter with Maurice and realize, wait a minute, she may not be human. I
Hmm.
know that turning point two, which is 75% of the book, that she has the worst moment, which is when she loses everything that's dear to her. So that's when her father is in danger. And I already knew how the story would end. So given that I knew those plot points, it was just breaking down the individual beats.
Hmm.
And that's what I really did to do Josephine Against the Sea. But that is just for Josephine, as I'm from the Barbados in the Caribbean. We are Bajans. I did have to tell you, Bajans, by the end of this conversation, hopefully you'll be speaking some of the dialect too.
Hmm.
Um, and we have this tradition of oral storytelling where it's kind of like, you sit around in a circle, you have a griot, the audience is really involved in the story. So you become characters in the story. And so, but I didn't do that particular storytelling structure for this book, but I just did want to mention it because we tend to rely a lot on the triad structure, and
Hmm.
there's so many more other storytelling structures out there for
Right.
people who want to experiment. There's this amazing post by Kim. I want to get her name right, Kim Yoon Mi, where she lists out all of the storytelling structures in the world. Is a fantastic post for people who actually want to know more about plotting. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Can you spell her last name for us?
Kim, so it is Kim, Yoon, Yoon, and
Hmm.
me, Mi.
M-I. Yes. Okay, Kim
Yes.
Yoon Mi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely. Thank you. We'll look that
Yeah.
up. That's great. So I don't know if you had the entire complexity of the story in your first draft or not, but there's a lot of themes and threads here. You know, you've got that very contemporary thread of Josephine processing the loss of her mother, plus not wanting her father to remarry. um, and she also wants to join the cricket team, and she's
Yeah.
told that girls can't do that, which
Yes.
is, again, something that a lot of modern day girls can relate to, and they're very real world issues. But then you've got this magical realism with
Yes.
Maris, and so how did you kind of weave those together without one overtaking the others? Keep them in balance.
So this is where I would give all the props to my amazing editors and agent.
Mhm.
When I first, in my first draft, my story was 28,000 words because at the time I was just trying to meet the limit for the competition, which was minimum 20,000 words. So it
Mhm.
was like Josephine was just kind of focused on keeping her dad from remarrying.
Mhm.
That was the entire narrative. So I plotted the story around her focus on her dad. When I got my agent, she told me one that it was middle grade because I was calling it young adult. So she told me it was middle grade. And then she was like, what else is going on in Josephine's life? What's her school life and at school life like? And she did have the cricket skills, but in trying to think about more obstacles that she could face, that is when I started to really analyze the community and what really goes on. And naturally, the theme of her not being able to get onto the cricket team as a female appeared. And honestly, it was something that was dear to me because when I was younger, I was such a huge fan of cricket and I really wanted to play, but there were no girls' teams
Oh.
available to me, right? So I wondered how it would be if Josephine was trying to get on the boys team. So, that theme came into it. So by the time the Caribbean version was published, which is my fishy stepmom, it had the thread of the cricket, her wanting to get onto the cricket team and the girlfriend and scaring away the girlfriends. And basically she had to use her cricket skills to save the day. So that is how I kind of combined those two elements.
Mhm.
By the time I got to my US, oh my God, let me tell you, this thing has gone through so many drafts. By the time I got to Josephine Against the Sea, my editor wanted to do even more connecting of the different threads. She felt as if it was good, but she wanted more because with the different things and goals that Josephine was trying to do, it was hard to figure out what is her real emotional core, what's the core problem that she has.
Mhm.
So she asked me to weave them together even more. So I connected her afraid of losing her dad to the game in that they used to celebrate and play together. But since
Mhm.
her mom died, he kind of avoids cricket completely. So that
Mhm.
was my way of trying to balance all these threads together.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I had amazing editors to help me do that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting that the original version published in the Caribbean is different from the US version.
Mm-hmm.
And when Scholastic bought your book, did they buy it the original version, but saying, but we're going to want changes? Is that how that worked?
So when I went on submission, I went on submission with 9 editors at first, and my editor at Scholastic got back to me with a revise and resubmit. And basically, she loved the story, but again, the feedback was that they were a little confused about what Josephine's main emotional drive was. So
Mm.
she asked me to do a revise and resubmit on the first 6 chapters, showing how I would connect all of the threads. And I did that, and she loved it, and it sold. But I was quite aware that because of Josephine's new perspective, a lot of the book would have to change. And it is the strangest thing because the scenes and the locations are basically the same. It's just that you're looking at it with a new perspective. So how Josephine would analyze a situation would change. So it was a different type of point of view. That's the best way to put it. So for example, in My Fishy Stepmom, she spends a lot of the time trying to figure out who Maurice is and what type of creature she is. And she finds out near the end of the book. And Josephine Against the Sea, she finds out who Maurice is by the middle of the book and spends the other half of the book trying to figure out how to stop her. So you can imagine with that change in perspective, even if the scenes are the exact same, her point of view and her emotions would be completely different. So it did take some rewriting, and it's actually fun for people who have read both. And I always encourage people to get both because there are scenes in here that I really love, but just didn't quite work with Josephine Against the Sea and vice versa. Yeah. So I tell people to get both because it'll be kind of like bonus reading for both.
Really?
Pieces. Yeah, but
really interesting.
Yeah, but that is the main difference, is a change in perspective. And yeah.
Okay. And I wonder if that's a difference in sort of the storytelling techniques of the two cultures, that your editor wanted those changes, or she just thought it would sell better with these changes. I don't know.
Well, for sure, I don't think she was thinking about selling better. I think she was mainly thinking about the emotional core. However, in revising it, I did make some changes to make it more accessible. Now, this is a very, very delicate line to balance, because you don't want people, like, I don't want Barbadians to read the book and feel as though somebody is trying to explain their culture to them, because then it'll be clear that it's not you that the person is writing for. But then at the same time, you don't want persons who are not Barbadian to be, confused by certain things. So the solution to that, for example, I can talk about cricket. Cricket is not a familiar sport in the US. I don't believe so, right? But it has some similarities to baseball. So I was able to think about what were the similarities to baseball and use those terms. They're the same terms in cricket, right? And instead of focusing on the logistics of the game, I focus on Josephine's emotions as she was playing. So you may not know what 5 runs and behind the wicket keeper and silly mid-off means, but you know when something bad is happening because of how she reacts. So it was always trying to figure out how, in terms of the cricket theme, how to balance the two. But I think that was the main change. There weren't any other changes, I think, that were made to make it more accessible. I don't think so. I could be wrong. This was years ago. This is like, this was in 2019, and so much has happened since then. But there may have been other changes, but it was just for clarification. And I don't think that it would stop persons from understanding and enjoying and learning about a new culture.
Well, and that's a really great example of how to make it accessible to people who don't understand the details, but we do understand the emotion.
Yeah.
And that's how we connect. I love that. So growing up in Barbados, when you were a child, did you have a lot of books that reflected you and your culture? Or were you reading a lot of things from other countries?
Oh, I was reading all of the Nancy Drew, all of the Hardy Boys, all of the Sweet Valley High. Anna Mars was a hit. Enid Blyton, like anything Enid Blyton, I was consuming. Honestly, I didn't realize the effect that would have on me until I started to write my own story. I started to write stories when I was around 9, 10. And my first character was a girl called Lily. She had red hair and green eyes, and she was a cheerleader. And I was basically writing Sweet Valley High fan fiction. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. But it didn't occur to me to write about my own culture because I was not reading books about the culture. I mean, and you don't realize the impact that has until you later try to create your own stories. And I was writing about crumpets. Had never tasted or seen a crumpet in my life, but I was writing about crumpets as if I knew what they were, because I know in the Bidens they used to have tea with crumpets,
Right.
And I think the first first Caribbean book I would have read was in school when I was a teenager, like 12, 13, when we started to do English literature. And though I really connected because I saw Caribbean landscapes, I saw people I know, I recognize in the book, I still didn't really connect with it because the themes were a bit heavy. It wasn't my living experience at the time. A lot of the books were set in the past. You know, it was dealing with themes, colonial themes, and things that you should know, but are not particularly enjoyable to read. So it still felt like work. It wasn't pleasure reading. So it was like schoolwork. That type of book, that type of literature that the region is known for is, you know, that is what I was ingesting. So it wasn't particularly enjoyable. So I did not want to write that, you know. And it's so great now that we have more books coming out of the Caribbean, because I think people forget that you start reading when you're a kid. You don't start reading from an adult. So you need to have a wide spectrum of books. You know, you can't only push for adult books, because you need to cultivate a society of readers, and you can only do that when you start writing books for children and books that children enjoy and want to read. So I really only in my 20s started to reread some of those books that I read as a kid and really started to love them. And that's when I really started writing more using dialect and setting things in my own country. But until then, I just would have never thought about doing it. And that's mainly because of the books I would have read as a kid.
Yeah. Wow. So speaking of dialect, I want to show an excerpt here on a slide of some of your dialogue, because I know people are going to ask about this. Let's see if I can pull it up. Here we go. No, that's not it. Oh, here we go. So, you know, why don't you read this for us, first of all, out loud?
Okay. So he says, Bean, you got to stop with this foolishness. He turns to me, scratching his chin. The beard is already growing back, though he shaved 2 days ago. He called me Bean, I think, relieved. I'm out of trouble. I lift my chin in the air. Daddy, she ain't right for you. Daddy sucks his teeth. You ain't even meet she properly, Bean. Daddy, if she can't deal with a little stink from fish guts, how she can handle you when you come home from sea? It's the same smell.
So this is wonderful because we get a sense of the cadence and the sound of the dialogue without it being hard to understand, hard for us to understand. Did you use a light hand with this, or is this pretty authentic right here to the way it would sound if I was in Barbados?
So I love this question because I worked so hard on finding a way to write dialogue that is authentic to me as a Barbadian and still accessible to other readers. So I always used to be terrified that when I send my short stories to literary journals around the world, that they would just think that I don't know how to use spelling and grammar, that they wouldn't realize that I'm trying to capture a voice, that they would just think I don't know English. And it was something that I was really self-conscious about. So there is no, we have a Caribbean, a dictionary on Caribbean usage, right? But there is no set standard way of writing it. It's all up to the writer. So I really spent a long time trying to refine how to bring it across. And the answer really is the rhythm and how you choose to lay out the words on the line. So that when a Barbadian reads this, they would read it with the rhythm of the dialect. When you read it, it may not be complete standard English to you, but you still would get the meaning of the sentence. And I remember I went to a festival in Trinidad called Bocas Lit Fest, and Irvin Welch was there. He wrote Train Spotting. And he was so confident. So I opened the book and I looked at the first page, and man, the Scottish slang, like it was full of the dinners and nays, and I was like, it
And
was
their
like a shock to
punctuation is
me.
different. Yeah,
Yes,
they don't put quote marks around dialogue either.
yes,
So,
it was a
yeah.
shock to me that, because
Mhm.
this is a book that became a cult sensation in the
Yeah,
world. So I was like, how did he, did his editor ask him to change anything? The rain just came down, so I don't know if you can hear it.
oh no, I can't.
Okay, all right, good, right. So I raised my hand and I asked him, did your editor ask you to change this to standard English? And I remember, oh my God, he looked at me like I was a complete idiot. So that he was like, why would a book set in Scotland, written by a Scottish man, not have Scottish dialect? And he just was like, no. I felt so silly. And after that, I really started apologizing and
Yeah,
being afraid of what other people may think about the writing. To me,
sure.
it should be clear what I'm trying to do. And honestly, if it's a person who is not open-minded, and is not open to other cultures and listening to the rhythm of other people speak, you're probably not the reader for me anyway.
Sure.
So yeah.
And, in this case, you were writing for middle grade readers,
Mhm.
so they might not have as much experience reading different
Yes.
dialects. So it still
Yeah.
has to be clear, but I think it
Yes.
certainly is.
Yes,
As
and yeah, I want to make sure of that. I really wanted to make sure that anyone could understand. And so I
Mhm.
spent a very long time. I actually have a blog post about it. How I came to that. I spent a really long time trying to refine the dialects. And to me, the key was not changing the spelling of the word if it sounds the same. However,
Mhm.
if the word is different, I needed to put the spelling. Like, for example, in that section, I have a word called gine, Gine, which
Mhm.
is Barbadian for going to.
Mhm.
But if I say going to, it would not be the same as going.
Mhm.
However, from the context of that sentence, you know that it means going to. And
Mhm.
so that is a word that you learned. So the next time I say going, you already know it means going to. You don't have to,
Right.
you don't have to pause. The
Mhm.
another one is winna, which is you all. And from the context, you would know that I'm talking about two people. So by the time you finish reading my book, you would know a little bit of Barbadian dialogue and accent. So when you come to visit, you can fit right in with the locals.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, so you talked about cricket and how to, those details, how to make them accessible. But
Mhm.
your setting, just the whole setting and the culture of Barbados, is such a important part of this story.
Mhm.
And was it, I believe I read that it was inspired by a folktale or the whole
Yes.
magical part. Okay, so,
Yeah.
you've got that cultural element as well. Ag- Did you worry about balancing that out as well? When you originally wrote this, were you
Mhm.
thinking it would just be published in the Caribbean, or were you thinking it might have a wider audience? And did you worry
Man,
about balancing those things?
I was just thinking I need to finish. The good thing about having to write in 3 weeks is that you don't have time for all the fears and questions to sink
No,
in.
you don't.
You have 3 weeks to finish a book. You're just putting words on paper. It's
Yeah.
only like during the editing process now that you would start to really break down, analyze what you're trying to do with the story. But Barbados was such an important part for me because I had I cannot think of any other traditionally published book set in Barbados.
No.
And it is 2021, and there are, as I said, there are a lot of different reasons for that, but it was really important to me to write a story that I could imagine myself having, an adventure that I can imagine myself having when I was that age.
Mhm.
Because even though, yes, Enid Blyton and she wasn't really writing for me, I still was able to relate to those characters in terms of their sense of mischievousness and sense of
Yeah.
adventure and going on tricks and spying on family. So
Mhm.
I wanted to have that kind of book for myself. So it was really important to set it in Barbados. And then I had always been fascinated with folklore. It's so interesting why I never thought about writing fantasy. Again, it is what I was reading. I was always reading the serious adult literary books. So it
Mhm.
didn't occur to me to, write Caribbean folklore until that story. There was a story in English class that my teacher read to me. It was a short story about a fisherman who became obsessed with a mermaid.
Mhm.
And it blew my mind at the idea of Caribbean mermaids. I did not
Mhm.
know they existed. So then later on, when I started to research and I realized that folklore is rooted in the Mamiwata African mythology, and it just came across the Atlantic, and then it manifested in different islands according to the unique characteristics of each island. So the mermaid kind of adapted to the person, to that region's culture. So for example, in Dominica, where it's a land full of trees and, you know, rivers, she became Mama Glow, who is a woman who has a bottom of a snake, and she protects the creatures in the river, and an encounter with her could be potentially deadly if you harm any animals in the rivers and forests. In a place, let me see, it was in Trinidad, where there are a lot of rivers, she became a river mama, where she has a bottom of a fish. And she sits on a rock and she combs her hair. And if you get her comb, it could bring you wealth and prosperity. And this is all rooted in the same mythology. So Barbados, we don't have a mermaid, you know, a particular mermaid, but I've got the opportunity to think about, okay, so what are the features of Barbados? We have a lot of beaches, a lot of sea. What would a salty mermaid be like? You know? So I was able to then use our landscape to create and to really kind of adapt the mythology to a character that I think might be representative of aspects of the island. So, you know, and then, you know, magic takes place in different locations around the island. There's a scene in the hot pot, which is this natural pool off the beach, and the water is naturally warm, and people say that it can cure arthritis. I have grannies and aunties who would swear that their arthritis healed because they soaked in that water. However, you know, science would be like, oh no, the water is heated because of underwater pipes from a nearby electricity plant. This is science. They're like, no, it is not. It is magic. So, you know, I was able to look for the natural magic in the setting to really put in the book. So, yeah, it was important to me to just put these stories all in one place. You know, I wasn't thinking about publication. I wasn't thinking about agent. I was just thinking, let me finish this and see what happens.
Yeah. But all of those things are still very accessible to anybody who's reading the book. You know, and it just opens up the world for the readers to learn about these things, which is so fascinating. So Josephine's best friend is autistic in the story. How were you able to create this character authentically?
Oh man. Okay. So that's okay. That's Josephine's best friend and neighbor. And Akai appeared on the page. I kid you not, and it's gonna sound a little bit kooky, but I was writing and he literally appeared on the page. He was one of those characters that was so impatient for you to create them that they just created themselves. And I actually remember, there's not much I remember from that 3 weeks because it was a mess. But I actually remember pausing. I'm going, hold on. So how did we get here? And I don't know enough about this. Is this the path that we're going down? Right. And I had to stop and start to do research, and I had to do it quickly at the time. So I contacted a friend who was a psychologist, and she gave me some places, some sites, some books to read, which I read very quickly. And I was able to develop traits that I thought might be more interesting for this story. Now, the thing is about Josephine and Akai is that Josephine is still grieving the loss of her mom. So she does have difficulty forming relationships with other people. And then Akai also has difficulties forming relationships as well. But somehow together they instantly connected. So I started to think about what they both needed out of a friendship. And even though they're polar opposites, like Josephine is noisy, she loves sports, she dislikes books. Akai is quiet, he likes to avoid trouble, and he loves reading. But despite their differences, they completely accepted each other's quirks without questions, and they were just loyal to each other. And I thought that both characters needed someone like that. So in a way, as I was writing, I was trying to think of how they could complement each other. And I think I was not focused on a guy being on the spectrum. The book is not about him
Right.
like exploring those emotions. It
Mhm.
is about him as a 11-year-old who, despite being the voice of reason, still likes the mischief and still likes the adventure. So I was able to focus on that.
Ah,
And it was only like me trying to research, like, what traits he may have to make it a little bit more authentic for things that he may do.
mhm.
But after that, I did get a sensitivity reader, and just to make sure, obviously,
Sure.
because I am not on the spectrum. So and she didn't have much to say at all, thank God. Like, it was mainly about correcting certain language to avoid stereotypes,
Hmm.
but it was really brief. So I was very happy that she didn't have any major I didn't do anything accidentally problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that about his character, that it's not about him being autistic. It's
Yeah.
just this is who he is, and their
Yes.
friendship is so wonderful and so interesting because
Yes.
they do balance each other out very
Yes.
nicely. And like you said, they're very loyal, and it's just a wonderful relationship to see. So
Yeah.
that's great. So if any of you have questions for Shakirah, please put them in the Q&A box. AJ asks, are there any plans to make your book into an audiobook? Do you know?
Yes, an audiobook is going to be available on the same day, July 6th.
Oh,
I'm
great.
so pleased about the audiobook because Scholastic hired a Barbadian actress, a local Barbadian narrator, to narrate the entire story. And she is so amazing. Like, she
Oh, good.
does like 3 or 4 different accents
Mm,
for each character, which, and
wow.
it like naturally flows out of her. I was excited. It was my book, but I was listening like, oh my gosh, I wonder what happens.
Yeah.
But Barry Williams, she's amazing. So yeah, it's going to be available in 2 weeks.
Great. Oh, and that's going to be so wonderful to listen to with that
Yeah.
lovely accent. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I mean, you gave us so much amazing information. Mary York says, "Congratulations, you captured a beautiful dialogue and my heart. Thank you."
Thank you very much. That's very sweet.
Yes, and we're all really, really excited to read this book, and I'm glad it's coming out soon because when we get excited about
Yeah.
a book like this, we don't want to wait too long. So,
Yeah, it's very scary. It's actually quite surreal because you've been talking about it for 2 years now,
yes.
and so it's a little bit freaky that it's going to be out in 2 weeks for every single person to read.
Mhm.
And I'm still working on my new book. There is going to be a sequel to this,
That's what I was going to
which
ask you. Yes.
which was not planned. I
Mm.
got the idea for the sequel when I was like on my second to last revision for my US editor. And I was like, no, personally, I'm not a person who likes sequels. I was like, no, this cannot be. Stop it. But then it just kept coming. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to pitch a sequel. And it's called Josephine Against the Heart Man. So she goes up against another Barbadian folklore character.
Great.
So yeah, there's a sequel coming out in 2023. And next year, I do have another middle grade horror coming out again. About It's about this 13-year-old filmmaker who follows her family to an island where they're partaking in a silent retreat, only to find out that the island is haunted by faceless children. And faceless children is called a dwen, who is a child who died before they're baptized. So that's more mythology that I'm
Wow.
exploring. But that one is a little bit scarier for sure. I'm a complete scaredy cat writing that. So yeah.
I would be afraid of writing that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating, though. That
Yeah.
is fascinating. I can't wait for that one either. So, as a
Mhm.
filmmaker, do you have
Mhm.
any contacts or aspirations that these books will get turned into movies?
I hope so. I mean, I don't want to do them.
Right.
I don't want to do them at all. But I think it would be so amazing, especially if it's an animation,
Oh, yeah.
because I love Moana. So I think that showing Fairyville, which is where the book is set, a fictional village in Barbados, I think showing Fairyville and the sea and the antics that she gets up to, I think that would be really fun.
Mhm.
So fingers crossed that that happens. Who
Yeah,
knows? Yeah.
absolutely. Well, we'll all start, emailing Disney and saying you have to.
That would be appreciated.
Yeah, okay. All right. Oop, let me see. It looks like maybe a question has popped up here. How do you write horror if you're not when you're not a fan of the genre? Good question, Ramona.
Oh, so it's funny. I like reading horror. Like, I
Mm.
think it's because I can control when I put down the book. I can't watch it because all of your senses are utilized. You know, you have the music, you have the score, you have the visuals. So it's a lot, is an overload for somebody who's a little scary person, scaredy cat like me. But I can read it and I enjoy reading horror. So when I'm writing this, I think about what would scare me, honestly, and I write that. And then I go, you know, I call my partner and hide, like, oh my God, I'm so scared. You won't believe what I just wrote. Um, but yeah, so that's how you do it. And I find it works because if I'm scared, then I know that it's working.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
scared because you know what's coming. And if
Yeah,
you
so
feel
but I
scared,
do
you're
like
gonna
reading
do
horror. Like, I'm a big fan of R.L. Stein books, Goosebumps. I inhale. I love Catherine Arden books. Like, I read them all. Hide and Seeker by Dacre Harmon was my recent favorite. I love the
Mhm.
Stitchers. Like, I love reading it. I just can't watch it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. There's just too many different
Yes.
sensory inputs when you're
Yeah.
watching it. I totally understand that. Yeah. Let's see here. Sheila says, you seem to write so fast and so disciplined, and the character's coming out of you. Uh, what helps you get it down quickly?
Mm.
So certainly with the first draft of Josephine Against the Sea, it was this contest.
Mhm.
But otherwise, do you write that quickly normally?
No, that's
No.
why that's why I smiled. I do not write that quickly normally. I am very competitive. So having a competition and deadline really worked for me at that time. But normally I need deadlines to really like, I'm a huge procrastinator, which is so funny because I think about all the books I could write if I would just stop procrastinating so much. But honestly, I'm fueled by deadlines. So when it's getting close to the deadline, that's when you'll see me on my laptop crying while writing. That is honestly my process. My process is to think and to procrastinate and to tap at the laptop for as long as possible until I see a deadline and go, oh, I'm in trouble. And then I just get it all down.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. I try to plot it as much as possible. That helps me in terms of
Mhm. Sure.
avoiding writer's block. But you can have a 20-page outline. You still learn the story as you're writing. Like, that does
Yeah.
not, I don't, for me, it doesn't change. I
Mhm.
would know where I'm going, but I don't fully understand my characters and the world until I actually start writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and all that thinking time counts. I mean, that's part of the process. So,
Yes.
it's still work to do the thinking, even though it doesn't feel like work at that time.
Yes. I like to say that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to get it all down at the end if I wasn't thinking about it for months. You know?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Couple final questions here.
Mhm.
Uh, Sharon says, do you have a certain set of questions that you ask your characters to get to know them better, or do they
Mhm.
just sort of flesh themselves out while you're writing?
Um, so I am a what I call a lazy writer. I know a lot of people like to do character bio sheets and stuff like that. I start small. I start by thinking about what the character was doing the day before the story began. I think about what they want and what they need. And then I give them three characteristics. I literally pick out three words that encompass the person's personality. And two of those words have to be contradictory. So if I say that Josephine, for example, is brave and loyal, she's also scared. And I
Mm.
try to create scenes where all three of those characteristics would be displayed at the same time. Because
Ah,
I find that people are not one dimensional and we all have contradictory traits.
sure.
So with that, because I find when I write too much like bios, I get overwhelmed by the person.
Yeah.
So if I start small and I write those three words like on a post-it note, I put them up and I just try to make sure that their actions and their dialogue reflect those three words at any given time. And so then I learn more about them because I find out how they would react in a particular setting.
Huh.
So it's like I know a bit, but I try not to do too much because I would spend forever just creating characters, and so I just like, what they want, what they need, what they were doing before the story began, and those 3 words, and that's it for me.
Over there. That's
Yeah,
great. I love that. That's a great
yeah.
process. It's really great. Someone asked if you've ever considered writing a graphic novel with your film
Yes,
background.
I
Yeah.
would love to. I mean, that is literally next on the list. I would love to, especially like I'm a big fan of anime like Shira and Avatar, Marvel. Like I would love to write something like that. It just hasn't come yet, but it's
Right.
coming. I can
Okay.
tell. I can tell it's coming.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
We'll wait for that. Okay, final question. And I know this is probably not a quick answer for you,
Mhm.
but Ramona asks if you could tell us a little bit about how you got your agent.
Okay. So okay. So I wrote what was my fishy stepmom in 3 weeks. But I had entered this competition the year previously, the year prior, and I
Okay.
did not get shortlisted. And I had entered it with a book that I had been trying to write for a very long time, for years. It's just, I didn't really know how to write a book.
Mhm.
And so I didn't get shortlisted, and I was really disappointed. So when I did this story in 3 weeks, I didn't want to wait to find out if I would have gotten shortlisted. I just assumed that I wouldn't. I just assumed I wouldn't. So I immediately Googled how to get an agent. I knew nothing at all. I blogged about my journey on my website. I really rambled. Sorry, that's the Caribbean way of talking. But it's like 3 blog posts. But I basically Googled how to get an agent, and I learned from there. I found out about manuscript wish list. I went to manuscript wish list, and I put in like Caribbean, folklore, mermaids, and I got a list of agents, and one of them is my current agent. I sent a query, but then I also found out about Pit Mad and the Twitter pitch competitions. And
Mhm.
I joined Twitter. I mean, I had a Twitter account, but I was not active on Twitter. I
Right.
joined Twitter simply to pitch for this book, and that pitch got 17 agents likes. And I
Right.
think it was because of that pitch that my current agent started reading a little bit faster, because I remember an editor liked the pitch, and is an editor that she knows well.
Mhm.
She never admitted this. I don't know if that's actually the case, but I think that she started reading faster because of the success of Pit Mad. But
Mhm.
then 2 months later, I think I had a full out with about 7 agents because of Pit Mad. And that's when I got the news that I was a finalist for the BERT competition. And that came with a Caribbean publishing deal. So I had to email all 7 agents with my full and ask them if they were still interested in maybe representing me in the US market. And because of the competition, then they all started to read. And that's when
Right.
I got my offer from my agent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a very strange route, but got there in the
It's
end.
but, you kept at it and it took, I think a lot of people don't realize how long it can take. You said it took
Mm-hmm.
about 7 months or so for all of that to
Yeah, but
unfold.
well, 4 to 5 months. But you know, I if I had known more about how hard it was to get an agent, I would not have tried. I can honestly tell you that, because you read other people's experiences, and they just talk about the statistics, or 1 to 2% of people. Like, I find that very discouraging, and I would have thought it was just not worth it. So
Mhm.
to me, I think honestly, it is literally asking a question. And if you look at the querying process, like, it is literally just asking someone a question, yes
Mhm.
or no. And I didn't know anyone in the
Right.
publishing US publishing industry,
Mhm.
so I didn't have any contacts at all. I literally
Yeah.
just asked them all a question, and if an agent is interested in your work, they will respond. And
Mhm.
that's how I look at it,
Right.
so I try not to think about how long it could possibly take.
Right. But,
Yeah,
those statistics of, 2% or 3% or whatever of the people
yeah,
who get agents, it's because that's as many books that are publishable. You know, having been an agent myself and
Yep.
reading the submissions, I can tell you that about 97% of what agents get and editors are not ready to be
Yep.
published. So
Yep.
if you just work on your craft and make sure that what you're sending is good, you're going to have boom, which clearly you did. And that's
Yes. And
what
that's
you.
actually very important. Like, this was
Mhm.
my first kids book, but I have been writing for years. I
Yes.
had films out. So I was not a beginning writer,
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's also something to take note of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. There's so many great comments going by in the chat box right now. Everybody's very inspired by you tonight. So
Yay.
thank you, Shakirah, for your time tonight and for all the wonderful information and sharing your journey with us. And we're so excited for your book to come out in 2 weeks. We're all going to be
Yes.
reading it, and I'm sure we'll all be chatting about it in the chat box in a couple of weeks. So it's
Thank you
just
very
been
much for
wonderful. So
inviting
thank you
me.
so much.
You all have
Mhm.
been great.
Yeah. Well, oh, well, thank you. Feel free to come back anytime. We would love to see you again. Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And we will see you next week. Good night, everybody.